Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for November 17th, 2017. On today's show, we're going to be taking a look at a bunch of news, including a Stripes TV series, Quentin Tarantino's next movie lands a movie studio, the running time of Star Wars Last Jedi, Cinefamily permanently shuts down, a Catch-22 miniseries, in a Martian Manhunter movie, possibly, and in the Mailbag, we'll be talking about how DC can move forward with the EU and make it a better place for you and me. This is Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film writers Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
And Hoai-Tran.
Hey, everyone.
Those are two names that are not easy to say, back to back.
And you killed it, Peter.
Okay, guys, the weekend's coming, so we should just dive into this news, because I know we have a lot of fun plans over this weekend, and let's just get to those quick as possible. Quick as possible. First up is news that a Stripes TV series is in development. Your headline, Chris, says nothing will ever be new again. What do we know about this?
Right, so I guess because there's nothing else to remake at this point, CBS is going to develop a TV series based on the 1981 comedy Stripes. That was a film that starred Bill Murray and Harold Ramis, and it was directed by Ivan Reitman, who also directed them in Ghostbusters. And interestingly enough, the series, I guess, pilot is going to be directed by Ivan Reitman also. So he's at least coming back to create this TV remake of his film. But beyond that, I don't really have a lot of hope for this project.
Well, his glory days are kind of behind us as well, which is does not give me faith in this project. I mean, Stripes. I'm not sure if you guys are a fan of Stripes. I mean, it's an enjoyable movie. I've never understood why everybody loves it. It's an enjoyable comedy. Do you guys have any love for the movie Stripes?
I mean, I've seen it, but I can't really tell you a lot about it. I mean, I remember laughing at it when I saw it, but it's one of those movies that ends up getting, or used to end up getting, rerun on like TNT every Sunday afternoon for some reason. It's just, so I feel like that sort of burned it into a lot of people's minds.
I just don't know how. I just don't know if anybody that's watching television today is going to be excited to see a Stripes TV show. HT, are you excited for this at all?
Well, I've actually never seen the original Stripes movie, but I feel like a lot of the cult Bill Murray classics are kind of dependent on the charisma of Bill Murray, so I'm not sure how well it will translate to TV. But it could also be a much more interesting and different take in the TV version, so who knows?
See, I was setting that up because I had a feeling that you probably had not seen Stripes.
Yeah.
But I bet you that's probably the case of a lot of people that are under the age of 30 or 25. I feel like Stripes is not a movie that, is in everybody's Blu-ray or, VOD collection. Those people aren't watching TNT. As Chris says, they're watching YouTube. Moving on to the next story, we've been talking a lot about Quentin Tarantino's next movie, which is either about the Manson family or about 1969. Whatever the fact of the matter is, that it has landed a home at one of the big Hollywood movie studios. Where did it land, HT?
So Sony has officially picked up Quentin Tarantino's ninth movie, which is the non-Manson murders movie that's set in the 60s and 70s. So it's also confirmed that Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, and Tom Cruise are circling roles in the for leads in the movie, and that Margot Robbie is being eyed to play Sharon Tate in the film. So this comes after some really sort of amusing stories about how dedicated these studios have been going to sort of court Quentin Tarantino to develop his movie at their studio. So Paramount, Sony, and Warner Brothers were the three sort of finalists who were trying to get this Tarantino film, and they were kind of going above and beyond to persuade him. Apparently, Warner Brothers created recreated sort of a 1960s studio lot to when he arrived to talk with them about the film. Well, what else?
Yeah,
Sony.
They had like the Warner Brothers logo from the late '60s and all these '60s cars. That's just insane.
And they made fake posters too, I think, right?
Yeah, they brought vintage furniture in, and they made mock posters for the movie. So they really wanted the film. I think, and then Sony was the one who ended up winning, and what they did was a multimedia presentation, which wasn't quite as illustrious as Warner Brothers, but apparently it won Tarantino over. So that is the news with the 9th Tarantino movie, still untitled.
It'll be untitled until the script leaks and we see the title page on written in handwriting by Quentin Tarantino on the title page. I'm sure. The next story is Star Wars Last Jedi. They are currently doing the international press tour for that movie, which is coming out in just a few weeks from now. And during the press tour, Rian Johnson revealed that The Last Jedi's running time will be 2 hours and a half, which is the longest Star Wars film in the franchise. This is a little bit surprising because for some reason, I assumed that he was going to be closer to the 2 hour mark. This film we've been saying, everybody that has seen this film says it's very different. So I mean, this is another thing to make it different. Do you guys have any opinion on what this says about the film at large?
Well, it does have all of the characters sort of at very far ends of the galaxy. We have Rey and Luke training. We have Poe Dameron sort of in his own storyline, and we have Finn with his own storyline with Rose. So I can see how all the sort of disparate plot threads can make for a longer movie, I guess. I'm not particularly a fan of longer run times. I feel like sometimes the films can become really bloated with that, but I trust Rian Johnson. I think that he could make a good and tight film out of even a 2.5 hour runtime.
Many of the early films, like the original Star Wars, was 121 minutes, Empire Strikes Back 124 minutes, Return of the Jedi 132 minutes, and then it seemed to go up from there with the prequels. Force Awakens was 135 minutes, so it's not like it's that much longer than Force Awakens, but I mean it is. It's another 15 minutes. But I'm sure as as we're gearing up to see the film, we're going to be getting a lot of news in the next few weeks. So stay with us, and we'll try not to spoil anything for you. A bit of bad news for film geeks in Los Angeles. It is that Cinefamily will permanently shut down. Chris, you wrote this article a couple days ago, but I wanted to get it on the podcast, and we've just had so much news lately. So now we finally get to talk about this. What is going on with Cinefamily?
Right. So in September of this year, Cinefamily suspended all their activities in light of allegations of sexual harassment against top executives who worked for Cinefamily. And so they've been closed ever since then, and now they just released word that they're pretty much closing for good, and their venue, the silent movie theater, is going to be renovated by the landlord. So that's pretty much the end of Cinefamily. Their statement makes it sort of like a twofold thing in that the investigation into the sexual harassment pretty much damaged them beyond repair, in that they sat on those allegations for too long, and also they basically don't have the money anymore to run the Cinefamily. So those two things combined have contributed to it shutting down for good.
This is sad because not that LA doesn't have a lot of movie theaters that are showing older films, but Cinefamily was very much one that did it very differently than all the rest. And it's sad that LA is losing this. But the article says that it could still remain a movie theater. We don't know. The future of this location is up in the air. Am I correct on that?
Right. I mean, yeah, there's no one owns it right now except the landlord. But hopefully, since the venue is there, someone will buy it and use it for good rather than, this sort of stigma that's been associated with now because of these allegations.
Yeah, it's a shame. It is interesting. I've already noted this in the past that, Alamo Drafthouse, when there was allegations and things going on, they didn't shut down for an hour. Cinefamily shut down for months, and are now shutting down permanently over. Much worse allegations. It should be said, but it'll be interesting to see if that location, if something comes of it. I almost want to suggest that I wish the Alamo Drafthouse would buy it, but that maybe they wouldn't want to. That sounds like. Maybe
they have their own problems.
Yeah, but it's also stepping into a hole. It's like we just went through some of this bad press. Maybe we shouldn't get involved here. But yeah. Also in the news, a Catch-22 miniseries is on the way with George Clooney to star and direct. HT, what do we know?
So George Clooney will be directing and starring in a 6-episode limited series adaptation of Catch-22. This will be from Paramount TV and anonymous content. There's no network currently attached to air the miniseries, so this is really early sort of development. But this will be only the second sort of adaptation of Catch-22 after the 1970 film by Mike Nichols which starred Alan Arkin and Martin Balsam. So Clooney will be starring as Colonel Cathcart, who was the primary antagonist of the 1961 satirical war novel by Joseph Heller. And this will also be George Clooney's first return to television after 2 decades, after he left ER, the medical drama that sort of broke him into mainstream success. And he's moved on to feature films ever since and not really gone back. But this will be a welcome return, I think, because he's kind of he's done a lot of work with the Coen brothers, for example, and doing these sort of farcical black comedies, a lot of them sometimes war comedies. So I think this is very in his element.
Have either of you read Catch-22? Because I have not.
I have. I read it for high school lit class.
Yeah, I also read it in high school.
Now, do you think
it was one of my favorites, though? Sorry.
Oh, really? Do you think this would make a good miniseries adaptation?
That's a good question. I feel like it could be because it was a very absurd and sort of high concept book. And with television, entering the era of peak TV and prestige television, you could definitely do something that's just as challenging and sort of absurd as the book was. And yeah, I think George Clooney, although he's had his hits or misses behind the camera, he could feasibly pull this off. It's something that's very dialogue heavy and sort of very somewhat hard to follow, but that's also the intention of the book as well. So I think it could be adapted to TV.
Yeah, it was adapted into a stage play, which makes sense for something that's dialogue as heavy as this. And, obviously there's the Mike Nichols 1970s film of the same name, a pilot. This is actually not the first time that this has been that they've tried to bring this to TV. They actually filmed a pilot for a comedy series based on Catch-22, starring Richard Dreyfuss in 1973, and I don't think it went through. Chris, your thoughts on Catch-22 miniseries?
I mean, I think it could work as a miniseries. I don't think it would work as like an actual long-running TV series, but I could see a miniseries working. Yeah, there's a lot of material in the novel for them to pull from. I guess it just depends on how true to the book they're going to stick, I guess.
And what about George Clooney? I know that we are fans of George Clooney as a director, but you did not like his recent film that came out this year.
Yes, Suburbicon is bad. It's a bad movie, but I have liked films of his in the past. I liked Good Night and Good Luck a lot. I loved Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. So I do think he is able to direct a good film. He just hasn't in a while.
Yeah. And last up on our list of news is they're doing a lot of Justice League interviews, and the producer Chuck Roven was asked who he would like to make a movie on, and he said Martian Manhunter. Chris, tell us what he said.
That's pretty much exactly what he said, what you just said. There's not a lot of detail. This is one of those news stories where it's more like he's hopeful that it'll happen, but there's no definitive movement on it actually happening. But in the interview, he was asked, what more obscure property would he like to tackle for a DC film, and he said Martian Manhunter would be on the list. Now, whether or not that ever happens remains to be seen, because DC has a lot of stuff in development right now. I mean, they have Wonder Woman 2, they have Aquaman coming out, they have Shazam, Black Adam, and so on and so on. They have stuff planned out for quite a while, or at least scheduled to be planned out. I don't know how planned out it is, but there's nothing definite yet.
And you are a DC comic reader. I'm not a big. I haven't really read any runs that have Martian Manhunter. Is this a character that should be on the big screen? Like, I don't really know much about Martian Manhunter.
The only thing I know about him is from the animated series.
Same.
Yeah. I don't know. That just seems like such a weird choice. In the mailbag, we're going to be talking about the future of the DCEU. And I'll just put this out here. I think they need to get another producer. I don't think Charles Roven is from what I've heard behind the scenes, is a positive creative force in the future of this franchise. And this pick seems kind of to indicate that, to me at least. But maybe I am wrong. I don't know much about Martian Manhunter. I've seen him in the cartoons, obviously. But yeah, let's get to the mailbag. Let's just jump right into the mailbag. Mike S. writes in, Justice League is obviously a course correction for the DCEU. I think even Peter would admit it can be, while it can be fun, which is saying something coming off Batman vs. Superman, it isn't the great Justice League movie we deserve. What does the DCEU need to do going forward, is his question. And we should say that I have seen Justice League, Chris has seen Justice League, but HT has yet to see Justice League. But I think she can still offer a valid opinion on this. What do you think, HT? Does Warner Brothers need to do with the DCEU to make it a success moving forward?
Well, I think they're kind of going in the right direction. I agree with the choice of Justice League as sort of a course correction. I saw a really funny tweet talking about, giving an anecdote about what Justice League was, in that it's the night when you're going out and you have to just throw up all of the shit that you had that night to have a good time the rest of the night. And I like that anecdote a lot. So I think that, they have had really messy footing starting off, but I don't think that Wonder Woman, for example, was an exception to the sort of path that the DCEU is taking. I think that it is hopefully an indicator of how the Warner Brothers and how the DC film universe is moving forward. And I think that having Jeff Johns, who is a huge DC Comics writer and is very much ingrained in that world and is very loving of all the characters, I think that having him sort of kind of at the helm is really helping already. And I liked, back when we were doing a lot of press about Wonder Woman, that, the Warner Brothers was trying to use that as sort of a guiding force for how they'll approach the DCEU. We don't know if that's what's happening anymore, honestly, with all of the reported spin-offs and strange anthology films. I think that for the DCEU to be saved, they need to stop trying to do the spin-off films about the Joker and trying to reach for whatever prestigious acclaim they can get by casting Leonardo DiCaprio or whatever, and just stick to fixing the main storyline as they have it now. And I think that, Justice League is that mandatory course correction, that vomit in the middle of the night, but I think that they are in the right direction.
It's interesting that you bring up Jeff Johns because he did not do interviews for Wonder Woman. He did not do interviews for Justice League, and they didn't have a director doing interviews for Justice League because obviously Zack Snyder, got replaced by Joss Whedon, and they didn't want to have weird questions coming up at the press junkets. But so it seems like it would have been perfect to have Jeff Johns in that Kevin Feige role, doing kind of like the grand plan interviews, but he has yet to step up into that role, which is kind of weird, because I think he would be the perfect guy to be in that role. But okay, let me get to some of my thoughts on where DC needs to go. I think if you see Justice League, one of the things that it gets right is it gets the characters right, and I think that's something that that's something Wonder Woman did that I think was really good, but the other movies didn't really do a good job at. I think if they concentrate on the characters and not, making this really baffling story, I think that would be the right approach. I think, characters over stories sometimes, especially with like superhero films, is probably the way to go. I think, obviously, HT, when you see this movie, you will see that they're trying to make it a more hopeful movie. There's even kind of like a long voiceover kind of by one of the characters suggesting that that's the direction they're heading in. I think that they need to get away from this kind of, I know Chris Nolan brought us the gritty superhero, and that became huge, one of the hugest films of all time. But I think people want really the cheesy, hopeful superheroes now, and I think that's how DC can differentiate themselves from Marvel. By the way, DC needs to stop trying to be different from Marvel, just to be different from Marvel. Not that they shouldn't embrace being different from Marvel. I think they made a lot of decisions along the way, like Batman vs Superman. They didn't have an end credit scene because they didn't want to be accused of copying Marvel, so they released the scene online the Monday after the release, which was baffling to everybody. This film obviously has some end credit scenes that, don't care. Not saying copy Marvel, but I'm saying like they shouldn't refrain from doing stuff just because Marvel, that's the Marvel thing. And also I would say, I think they need to. I disagree with you. I like these side stories. I like these standalones. That is something I think they could do different than Marvel is. They could kind of do these stories. I'd like to see, a Red Sun Superman. I'd like to see a Batman Beyond. I'd like to see, these kind of stories that take place outside of the continuity. And I'm not saying that that's what it should be. I know cinematic universes is like the hot thing in Hollywood, and they should continue trying to do that as well. But I think, one thing that Marvel isn't doing is these kind of like standalone tales that have been great in the comic books. Let's see those on the big screen. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm with you on that respect. That I do wish they would try a little harder now to be more standalone stories. Like one of the most refreshing things about Wonder Woman was that, aside from that, that intro where she gets the letter from Batman or whatever, that movie has almost nothing to do with the rest of the DCEU. At least at that time it didn't. Justice League sort of ties it in a bit more, but when Wonder Woman came out, it was pretty much like a standalone movie, and I loved that about it. I didn't have to worry about tying it into the franchise, and I think that's what makes it work really well. And I want more of that. I want good stories. I don't want good entries that build up to a bigger story. Like, I'm not really interested in that. Give me something that can stand on its own. That's what I'm looking for.
Oh, I have one more to interrupt you because this just occurred to me. I remember talking to Kevin Feige, and he was saying the year that they were making Iron Man, that they made a conscious decision while the competition was concentrating on making a good villain. They decided to make a decision to concentrate on the heroes. And, they've been criticized for, not having great villains in Marvel, but that was a choice, according to him. Obviously, he's talking about The Dark Knight and Heath Ledger as the Joker. why don't we, if DC is going to try to do things better than Marvel, why not try to do the villain better than Marvel? Because the villain in Justice League is an abomination. It's probably the worst comic book villain of all time. I think that is a place that they could actually succeed.
Well, they did make Suicide Squad, which is all villains, and that did not turn out well. So I don't know. I don't know if that's true.
DC has a really great rogues gallery, not just Batman, but in general. So they could take advantage of that, definitely.
Chris, do you have any other thoughts on this?
I mean, yeah, I think they could bring in those better villains, but like I said, they tried that with Suicide Squad, and that really didn't work out well. So I don't know. I think it needs better writers, I guess, is what they really need. They need better screenwriters to be telling these stories than what they have now.
I think part of the problem is, obviously, I think Zack Snyder's out of this picture now. But he had some. I heard David Goyer's. Say what you will about David Goyer, but he wrote The Dark Knight, and that ended up pretty well. I heard his script for Man of Steel was amazing, and I heard the more and more Zack Snyder worked on it, the more and more or less amazing that script became. It's tough when you're a person like Zack Snyder and you have a producer like Charles Roven, who doesn't know a good thing, in my opinion, and then your other producer is your wife. I don't know. It just feels like, I think there's a lot of great filmmakers out there, and it's not just Zack Snyder, but I think there's a lot of great filmmakers out there that that aren't, that they have producers who stop having the ability to tell them no. And I think that became a problem with Zack Snyder. And I think you're right. They need a good screenwriter, but they also need a good filmmaker that is willing to, work with that screenwriter and not, try to make it their own just to make it their own. Any thoughts?
Yeah. I think a behind the scenes rehaul, is a great idea, Peter. Go ahead, Chris. What were you saying?
No, I was agreeing. Yeah, that sounds about right, what they should be doing. I don't know if they will do it, but we'll see.
And by the way, I'm now sitting here thinking, like, my comment about Debbie Snyder is going to be taken wrong. And it was not meant to be a sexist comment. I want to first say that. It was meant to be like, if you are a husband-wife team, usually you're working together. You're trying to help that other person. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're not standing in their way. And I think sometimes the producer has to, like, take a tough stance and be like, that's, and I'm not sure. I think that's tough with the husband-wife team. But, okay. So, anyways, do you guys have any more thoughts on this?
I did want to say that I liked what you pointed out when you first reacted to Justice League on Twitter. You said that it kind of reminded you of sort of the animated Justice League more than what they've been doing with the DCEU so far. And I like that direction a lot. That sort of what we saw a little bit of in Wonder Woman, that aspirational quality and that earnest quality that I associate the DC Comics superheroes with, and that I hope that the DC will use as sort of their defining sort of tone, as opposed to Marvel. Like, not just to oppose Marvel, like you said, but as sort of a coherent, a way to cohere their universe. So I think they could be going in the right direction.
See, like, I want to believe that they're going in the right direction. Then I hear, Warner Brothers mandated that Justice League needs to be under 2 hours. Does every superhero movie need to be under 2 hours? Is that something that the studio should be saying to artists? Maybe they should be saying that to Zack Snyder. I can totally understand that. But, Chris, do you have any thoughts on that?
No. I'll say this about Justice League. This will be my final thought on it. I did not like the movie, but it's really trying really hard, the movie. Like, when I was watching Batman v Superman, I was like, oh, this is just a mess. No one knows what's going on here. With Justice League, it's also a mess, but you get the sense that they're trying really hard to make it work. So I can appreciate they're at least sort of trying now. I don't know. They don't succeed, but I appreciate that they're trying.
Yeah, and I've now seen the movie twice, and people are in the theater laughing, and they seem like they're having a good time, which is more than that could be said for Batman vs Superman. I think even if it's a mess, I think it's a somewhat fun mess. I can't wait for H2 to see this though.
I wonder if my views will change completely after Justice League. I'm a little worried, but I am optimistic, like the DC's comic superheroes would have me be.
I'm awaiting this angry email over the weekend after you say it. They're like, "What were you talking about?" But I think we said it all. If anybody out there has a thought that we have not expressed on where DCEU needs to be headed to be successful in the future, please send it to peter@slashfilm.com, and maybe we'll mention it on there. That's also where you can submit your questions for the mailbag. That's peter@slashfilm.com. Please mention your name and general geographic location in case we mention them on the air. Where can we find more of your work online, HT?
You can find me on slashfilm.com. I'm at HTranBui on Twitter, and I have the Millennial Falcon podcast on iTunes.
Where can we find more of your work, Chris?
I'm also at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at CEvangelista413.
You can find all my work at Slashfilm. You can find me at Slashfilm on Twitter, Instagram, all the social networks. You can find this podcast published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, all the popular podcast apps. Please go to iTunes, give us a rating, give us a review. That helps us out. Spread the word, and we will see you on Monday.